Aquí comienza Perdonen que no me acuerde, un programa de Montessori Senior.
Bienvenidos a Perdonen que no me acuerde, el podcast donde hablamos de memoria, Alzheimer y todo lo que nos hace humanos, aunque a veces se nos olvide. Como habéis leído en el título de este podcast, hemos hablado con el doctor Alan Power, y desde que hablé con él hay una frase que me acompaña. Él ha dicho algo así como que la única forma de descubrir algo nuevo no es viajar a tierras lejanas, sino mirar con otros ojos. Y eso es lo que queremos hacer hoy. Queremos cambiar esa mirada. Porque cuando hablamos de demencia, durante mucho tiempo la pregunta que se ha hecho todo el mundo ha sido ¿qué pastilla le doy a mi madre? ¿O qué pastilla le doy a mi padre? ¿O a mi paciente? Pero, ¿y si la pregunta fuera ¿qué necesita esta persona para sentirse bien? Para sentirse segura, escuchada, valorada. Imagínate por un momento que tu madre o tu padre no quiere ducharse. Lo más rápido es que podemos decir es por culpa de la demencia. O sea, mi padre no se quiere duchar por culpa de que tiene una demencia. Pero en realidad no hemos investigado si lo que está pasando es que el agua esté fría, si es que ya no me reconoce o no reconoce a la persona que le está ayudando, o que nadie le ha explicado en realidad qué es lo que va a pasar a continuación. Por lo tanto, no es la demencia la que está causando el malestar, sino que lo está causando el entorno. Y aunque esto parezca simple, en realidad cambia todo, porque te está cambiando la mirada. Por lo tanto, vais a escuchar a continuación la entrevista con Alan Power, que es geriatra, escritor, divulgador y sobre todo una de las voces más humanas y lúcidas dentro de la industria o del mundo del cuidado en la demencia en particular. Alan es una persona que lleva más de 30 años desmontando el modelo farmacológico tradicional y está construyendo alternativas donde la relación, la empatía y el bienestar son el centro de la atención. Este episodio es un viaje, un viajazo, un viaje para aprender, para desaprender y sobre todo para recordar que no necesitamos ser médicos para mejorar la vida de nadie. Solo necesitas mirar con otros ojos. Así que, vamos allá.
Well, Dr. Power, it's amazing having you in our podcast. I really want to thank you because I know you're a very busy man, and for me, you're like, as you say, like a little star in the black sky where I can see the light. So I really appreciate your work. So for you having some time to share with me, it's really it makes me very happy. For those Spanish people that don't know you, could you give us a little introduction about who is Dr. Power and what's your work for last years?
Yes, absolutely. And thanks, Rodrigo. It's great to be here and great to meet you as well. My name is Alan Power, and I live in Rochester, New York, in the United States. And I'm a geriatrician by training, a doctor for older people. And I have left practice several years ago because of the work I've been doing to change the way we think about dementia and to change the way we support people living with dementia, and have been traveling and giving educational seminars, consulting, and working part-time with the Research Institute in Ontario, Canada, as well, to help to get some of this knowledge spread through them as well.
Oh, thank you so much. And doctor, if I may ask this question, why dementia? Why did you get involved with old people dementia? There is something in your story or in your life story, or?
I had a grandmother who had very severe dementia. At the time, I was still pretty young. I didn't really know a lot about it, and it didn't really. It certainly affected me to see what had happened to her, and to see the kind of care that she was getting, or maybe not getting, in where she was living. But that wasn't a career-defining path. I don't think. It's just something I look back on. I was actually going to just be a general practitioner, just a family doctor, and work in the community. And I did that for 7 years. And when I first moved into geriatrics, everything was kind of an accident. I was working very hard. I had a very busy, I was a two-person practice. I didn't have a lot of free time. I had small children that I wasn't seeing enough. I enjoyed music and had no time for that. And, And I saw an advertisement to work in a large long-term care home as part of a full-time medical staff. And I have to admit that the things that initially attracted me were a bit more of a lifestyle movement. It had more control over my work hours, and it gave me vacation time, things I wasn't taking time. So I said, well, I'll check it out, and I really liked it. But this is 1991 when I changed it. That was something doctors didn't do over here. If they were successful. Yeah. And but I talked to a mentor of mine at the university who encouraged me. He said, why not? He said, you're a good doctor. You can always go back and practice if it doesn't work, And, a lot of my colleagues thought there must be something wrong with me because I would leave a very successful practice. It's like maybe they thought I was on drugs or something. I don't know. But then a year later, they would say, oh, you're the only happy looking person around here. I wish I could make a change too. So whatever it was, I was enjoying it very much. But it was still very much within that medical approach to dementia, to aging, with a group of geriatricians. And I thought we gave very good care. But then after about 6-7 years, I discovered the culture change movement in the United States. And I discovered it initially through the movement called the Eden Alternative. And after hearing someone speak about it, I had her connect me with Dr. Bill Thomas, who with his wife Jude founded it. And I spent a week with him visiting some of the homes that were doing this and following him around, and then went to the training that they gave to understand the principles behind it, and that kind of changed the way I saw everything. It really opened my eyes to things that I didn't see that were still going on, and tried to get the home I was working with to go down that path. They weren't ready for it yet, so I eventually left and found another place that seemed more ready to change. And worked there for about 13 years. And we not only got involved with that, but we also got involved with the greenhouse project, a small house model.
Wow! Yeah, I know that.
Yeah. And we built the only 2 community-based greenhouses in the country, actually. And so we've done a lot over the years. We had done a lot over the years, but all the time, even going back to my early days, I was never happy with the way we cared for people with dementia. I was always very critical and very careful with giving drugs to older people in general because there's so many side effects, and I particularly saw it with drugs like antipsychotics. Initially, when I started, we had some of the older antipsychotics, the ones were used in the 60s and 70s, and their side effects were obvious. Then the newer, what they call the atypical antipsychotic drugs came out in the 90s. And we began using those. And I never used a lot because I just didn't like the way people looked or felt or acted when they were on them. I didn't think that people were really being taken care of. I just thought they were being sedated. And every once in a while, we would try an approach with somebody that would satisfy them and make them happy. And I would say, well, okay, if that person was able to be helped without a pill, I wonder how many more people would be able to be helped if we were just smart enough to figure out what they need. And so I always pushed back. I never used nearly as many drugs as anybody else was using. And in my new job, I continued on that way. And when people would call me up, expecting a prescription, I would instead say, let's hold a meeting and talk about what else we can do. And I'd kind of put them through the mill, And it got to a point of conflict, with coworkers and colleagues that, why don't you just give us a pill? And the truth is, even though I was quite sure, and I was already starting to speak a little bit about how to get around this, I didn't have a clear system that I could teach people what else we could do instead. And I tried, so go ahead.
Sorry. I was going to say that, and this is where the pill paradigms appears in your life, or something that's occurred to
absolutely.
you. Could you explain to our listeners what is? Because I'm so impressed. I didn't say, but you've been written two books. Sorry for my broken English. You have written 2 books. One is Drugs Beyond Dementia, and the other one is
Dementia Beyond Disease. Dementia Beyond Drugs, Dementia Beyond Disease, right?
Yeah. So I was impressed about this pill paradigm. Please, could you explain us a little bit about how we
the pill paradigm. We say paradigm, probably say paradigm in Europe. It's a mindset, and what I've been saying more recently is that even though the antipsychotics were the catalyst for me to start writing a book, um, they were never the problem. They're a symptom of a system that doesn't know how to support people properly. When you don't know what to do and people seem distressed and you get distressed, you give them a sedating pill.
Yeah.
And that's the
Yeah.
mindset. And it comes from really, we have become so hyper-focused on the disease of dementia. Over the past 30, 40 years, we've been really, it's no longer just calling people senile or, or forgetful. We're talking about all the plaques and the tangles in the brain and all the different chemical abnormalities. And and it's okay to do research with that. I'm not complaining about that, but it's caused doctors to only see the diseased brain and not see the person anymore. And so when there's a problem, because the person has this incurable disease, the assumption is, well, then they need a pill. That's the pill paradigm. That if there's a problem because it's due to brain disease, they must require a pill. And so my approach that I've evolved, in which I started now, it's been about 20 years since I began doing this, began writing the first book and trying to figure out what to do, was to say, I've never liked the idea that when people have, when they have different words or actions, we call them behavioral symptoms of dementia. Or they have the BPSD is the English abbreviation, behavioral and psychological symptoms of dementia. So if someone tries to leave a locked living area, if somebody walks into the wrong room, if somebody is resisting when you're giving them a shower, that's a BPSD, And so the implication of that is that these are symptoms of dementia. They do it because they have dementia. But that's where I have a big departure from the rest of the medical profession. And not following that framework is essential to the success I've had. And just to explain it quickly, when we talk about that shower, if you or I were doing an experiment where we had a staff member give us a shower in that same situation, first of all, it would be kind of an embarrassing and difficult situation for anybody to be in.
Well, sure, for anybody, yeah.
Yeah, and I will often ask people in classes, if you were the one getting the shower, what might the person do that would make you want to resist them? And people say all the usual things. If I don't know the person, if the water temperature is off, if they don't tell me what they're going to do next, if they don't explain themselves, if they don't let me take part. And those are really all the kinds of things that people with dementia need too. They're not any different. The difference is that when you have dementia, you may have trouble with communication. You may have trouble with coping with stress. You may have trouble with problem-solving skills or memory. And so you might, if you or I were in the shower and they turned on the water and it was too cold, we would probably just say the water's too cold, or we might lean over and change it ourselves. A person who can't communicate that might shout or scream, and they might even strike out at the person. So the dementia did affect the way they responded to that situation. But the dementia didn't cause it. What caused it was the cold water. And so if you just give people a pill, then you're never going to turn the water temperature up. And that's a very simplistic example. But when you look at all the more complex things that people need, like to have meaningful engagement during the day. I know you're affiliated with Montessori, so you know about that. Or to be treated like an adult, to have meaningful relationships, to have choice and control throughout the day, to feel safe and secure psychologically as well as physically. These are needs we have, and they can also be expressed just like the cold shower. But we call them behaviors, and we give people pills, and the pills are never going to fulfill those things. And so that's really, to me, the big difference that we need to pay attention to. It's not the dementia. The dementia may be modifying how we react, but it's not the root cause. And the root cause, I believe, is in several aspects of well-being. And I use one framework that came from the Eden Alternative for viewing well-being that all humans need. And what I did in my second book was I took that framework and applied it to dementia to show how we could, first of all, how people lose access to well-being, and how our systems of care actually take away people's well-being even more, and then how we can restore it. And in doing that, and in developing a course for the Eden Alternative, I was actually able to come up with a case conference method where instead of just saying this is dementia, we look at those different aspects of well-being. There's 7 of them, and we look at them like 7 drinking glasses, you know, and we say, okay, security, how full is their glass right now? How secure do they feel? How full is their glass for autonomy, choice, control? And what I found in teaching this is you can have very smart, very caring people who've done everything they've been taught to help people who are distressed. And when you look at those 7 glasses, they're all very low, many nearly empty. So you can stop right there and you can say, you've done everything that the system has taught you about dementia, and yet no one's taught you how to fill these 7 life-giving needs that all human beings have. And that's why the person hasn't gotten better. And then the other big departure, besides just blaming these things on dementia, that's really different, is that a lot of the training teaches us how to respond to distress, how to react to distress. So sit down with a person and hold their hand, or give them a massage, or listen to music. And those things will calm you in the moment, but it's going to happen again and again because the need is still there. So using this well-being and trying to fill those glasses actually gets to the root cause. So it's not just a matter of calming the person in the moment, it's a matter of actually, you might say, curing the behavior, actually stopping it, stopping the cycle, so it doesn't keep happening every day over and over.
Like breaking the cycle, no? Like
exactly.
You brought to my mind the example that I read on your book about. I think it was called Mrs. The lady that was intervened by a nurse, I think, or an auxiliary trainer. That I think you explained it on a way that this circle was broken because this assistant could just sit with this lady on another room, no, in a quiet room, ask her what was going on, and have this emotional contact, no, where you can build up a new relation, no, and that's a thing that we see here every day, no, that we cannot how we will say this in English, we cannot intervene if we don't have this emotional contact, no, or this emotional connection with the with individual.
Emotional memories are very strong. Even with significant dementia, emotional memories are very strong. People it's like the old saying, people may forget what you say, but they don't forget how you make them feel. And that's very true with dementia. And when people express strong emotions, even if what they say doesn't make sense in our reality, the key is not to try to convince them of what our reality is, but to connect, to validate the emotion, to find out what that expresses, to find out what maybe is symbolically being expressed with words, and to meet the need that's underlying. You mean that if someone says, I want my mother, and their mother is long dead, you can't bring their mother back, but you may be able to understand what needs are being expressed by looking for a parent, and then start to meet those through a better care system. And so that's really a lot of looking into symbolism too.
Yeah, thank you so much. One other thing that I was surprised about your work, because I think I just felt it as like something natural, no? That we tend to think that being at private homes is a good solution, no? But you always claim that conversation is the powerful tool. And I feel on my mind like this kind of, I don't know if you say this in English, like a dichotomy, no? Where
dichotomy,
yeah, no, that for example, at home, caregivers, no, or beloved ones, no. For example, if I am the husband, I am taking care of my wife. It could be really stressful for me to maintain conversation every time, no, to find these meaningful activities, no, and maybe getting to an institution is the right solution. But afterwards, at least in Spain, the ratio that we have in institution is so low. We are talking about 0.5, something like that. So
very low.
So how can we encourage the families that might be listening to us, no, or give them some tools to, I don't know, to empower the conversation techniques, or what can we tell them?
I think most family members are doing the best they can in the system we have, and I don't know the system in Spain like I do the U.S. But just speaking from my experience, I mean, I would want to stay home. Most people want to stay home as long as they possibly can. And the truth is, with our demographics changing, with the aging of the world, we can't just build more residential care homes because there won't be enough people to work there. So we do have to keep people home. But what happens, unfortunately, because of society's fears and stigma about dementia is that people get isolated. So when you have a diagnosis, people not only avoid you, but they avoid your family too. They don't come around. And the two of you, you and your partner, become isolated. And so you end up having to do everything for the person. And that's why I think some of the day centers that have opened have been very helpful, because they get people out of the house into environments that are social. Once again, they can be done in a right way or a wrong way. They should really provide meaningful activity, not just entertainment, or not just turning people loose without any kind of a meaningful engagement. But it's a good way to give everybody a respite from just being two people. And I think a lot of the communication, the conversation skills can be taught to family members too, and teaching them you don't have to do everything. They can help around the house. They can set the table for dinner. Keep them involved so they also have a meaning. They're not just being someone who's being taken care of, which makes them feel even more disempowered, and it just leads to another vicious cycle of helplessness that doesn't have to be there. So it's really about teaching people the tools to be successful at home longer, because that's where people have to stay. And it's about retooling our communities to become more inclusive of people with dementia, so they aren't isolated without help. Teaching our neighbors and our public buildings and our bus drivers and everybody how to help people so that they don't have to go to a nursing home fast, because nobody will support them in the community.
That's right.
That's part of the solution, I think.
Yeah, I always tell my families when we were giving like a home support to tell everybody in the neighborhood, no, they talk with the bakery guy and talk with the newspaper guy. I mean, at the end, we're human beings and people, more or less, but we are good people, no? I mean, people will understand the situation and will help you. But it's so, I think in English, you will say like burnout, no, for the caregivers at home.
Burnout, yes, absolutely, yeah. People just get exhausted. They get exhausted. They give and give, and part of that burnout is this feeling of dementia, that people are incapable and doing everything for them. So it's part of it is the attitude. Yes, the person can help. The person can contribute. You have to continue to involve them in things and let them help to the best of their ability with the proper cueing and the proper facilitation. But the other part of the burnout is the reality that we just don't have, certainly in our country, we don't have enough community support for people in this situation. Home care is all paid for privately, and it's not inexpensive. It's very expensive. And if you were to pay for aides 24 hours a day, you're paying as much as you would in a residential care home to have people come into your house. So it's very expensive. Our insurance, Medicare, only covers care for maybe a week or two after you get out of the hospital. After that, if you're home long-term, you're paying for it out of your own pocket. And so it's very hard, unless you have a lot of money or a lot of family members, it's very hard to be a person all by yourself, and not only being a spouse, but or a son or daughter, but being, in effect, the nurse and the nurse's aide and the social worker, and you're filling all those roles because you have no one else to do it for you.
I want to know what's your impression right now, because we've been talking about private homes and everything, but you said before that you have been working and giving lectures to professionals. What is your feeling about the industry, about our side, about the doctors, nurses, and people taking care? Because I think there is enough. There's your word, Bill Murray, a lot of work, Dr. Cameron Camp. I mean, there's a lot of work around the world. And we have even papers saying that no pharmacological intervention is more powerful or more. It works better than giving pills to people. But I feel that the industry or regular doctors are still, like, I don't know, in prehistoric time. They don't want to see. What is your vision about this point? Do you think we have some future in it?
Yeah, you talk about the economy. It's certainly I know Cameron and other people I work with who do these kinds of things. We have some very gratifying moments when we have excellent education sessions, or we hear about this organization or that organization that's doing wonderful things. But on the other side of the economy, it seems like the majority of homes still have not made any real movement toward anything different than the same institutional approach that we've always had. And there are a lot of reasons for it. Part of it is their own interests, and part of it is that it requires some effort to change. And a lot of people, if they're doing okay, they just don't see why they should, take any risks. And part of it is not the fault of the providers, but the system we're in, because the government certainly tends to keep people in institutional mindset with many regulations. The ways we reimburse long-term care often encourage institutional practices. So it's very hard to get as much money if you change the way you do things. We have a system that pays more for, it seems like they pay more for bad outcomes than good outcomes. So there's no incentive, to work proactively to improve people, because when somebody's abilities, when their functional status and medical condition improve, you get a lower pay scale because they're not as complex. So
it's like upside down,
yeah, exactly. So it makes sense on the surface, and yet you realize that you're giving the wrong incentive to people. And then you have, certainly in our country, the legal profession that makes people averse to risk. And so people don't want to take chances on change. And then you have the public mindset too. And we have a community full of ageism and ableism. And that really, as much as anything, has driven the development of the institutional nursing home. This idea that we not only don't value older people in general or people with dementia, but by extension, we don't value the people that work to take care of them. And so they're low paid. They have often, not living wages or not good job conditions, high turnover because they get burnout, obviously. They don't have, in most institutions are very hierarchical. So the people who are doing the work don't get a lot of say in how decisions are made. And part of what the movement, like movements like Eden and other culture change movements do, is they say we need to turn that around. We need to keep the decision making, day-to-day decision making, as close to the elders and those who are close to them as possible. So that if someone's trying to decide when to get up or when to have a shower, that should be the person living there and the people that take care of the person, not a director of nursing or an administrator or somebody high up in the echelon there. So
can we say, sorry, doctor, can we say that you, after 30 years, you feel less lonely than when you started all this journey? Can you feel
I
that
definitely feel less lonely. I definitely feel less lonely, but it's very hard to fight the larger powers that be. The medical model is so pervasive, and these medical ideas, even though they don't work nearly as well as what I'm doing, it's very hard to convince people. I'll give you an example. And I know from things I've read in the past, Spain has struggled with antipsychotic levels in nursing homes. I just remember one article, it was probably around 2016 it came out, that looked at 8 European countries and looked at their antipsychotic use. And I think Sweden was the lowest with like 12%, and I think Spain was the highest. And they were somewhere up around 60% of people on antipsychotics.
Yeah.
So the kinds of numbers, even 12 is a lot, the kinds of numbers that get used. And I'll tell you that the approach I developed is being used by a colleague of mine. She's a doctor of nursing practice who works in the state of Arkansas. And over the years, she's developed an adaptation of my approach where she and her consulting team are giving support to 105 long-term care nursing homes. So 105 different homes across the state. Now that is approximately half of the homes in the entire state. And they're all different kinds of homes, big, small, city, rural, doing culture change, not doing culture change. And using this approach, I was just on a podcast with her a few weeks ago. Those 105 homes are now averaging 4.6% antipsychotic use. Over 100 nursing. So that's not one home, that's 100 of them are down to that level, which means some of them may be 8%, but some are down to 0, but they're averaging around 4, way below what our national average is, which is now up around 20. Probably yours is still quite high, I imagine, even if there have been improvements. And so just to show you how hard-headed the medical profession can be, she was invited to speak about this. She gave a webinar to some people from the Long-Term Care Society, and then was invited to speak at their annual national conference. So she went to this national conference, gave her presentation about the approach, and later she was approached to come to a reception because she was voted one of the 5 best presentations in the conference. So she went to the reception, and they announced the winner, and she was not the winner of the top 5. And one of the people that organized it came to her and it was a little apologetic. And he said, "We really loved your presentation. The only reason you didn't win was that the judges didn't think that it was replicable enough." Now, here she's done it in 105 nursing homes. What does it
And it's
take?
not replicable.
Yeah. So obviously there's a mindset saying, okay, this is too fuzzy. It's not a pill. There must be some reason why we can't give this legitimacy. And so there's this, when you talk about things like well-being, people look at you like you're from Mars, and especially if you're a doctor. And even though I can show them data, it's very hard to convince people that what they're doing, they have to abandon this thing they've been taught. And when I started writing the book 20 years ago, the first thing I did was to push myself away from medical thinking because I knew I also had a pill paradigm. I also had all this narrow training that made me a doctor, that I had to, that as we say, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and looking for a different answer. And so I realized if I was going to find a different answer, I had to change my thinking too. So the first thing I did, and it's the one thing that has stuck with me all these years, is I said, I have to redefine dementia for myself. How can I define dementia in a way that doesn't just see brain disease, that sees the whole person, that doesn't carry any stigma or judgment or over medicalization of the person? And that's where I came up with that definition. Dementia is a shift in the way people experience the world around them. And I just used that definition. And when I stepped back and just looked at that without any other qualifications, then I began to see things I couldn't see before. And so I always start when I do seminars with that definition because it opens people's minds. And I use the quote by Marcel Proust that was in the first book, that Dementia Beyond Drugs, that you read at the beginning, that the only true voyage of discovery is not to visit strange lands, but to possess other eyes, to see the universe through the eyes of another or 100 others. And that's really, it's not about I invented something new or discovered something that wasn't there. It's just stepping back and saying, how can I look at this differently? And the empowering message for people, whether they be family members or staff members, the empowering message for them is that everybody can do that. You don't have to have a doctor's degree. Everybody can look at something and say, how can I see it differently? So it's the power is with everyone.
Yeah, you said a lot of very important things, but this last thing is like that we don't need to be doctors. No, myself, I'm a nurse, and I always challenging doctors, or trying to talk with them, and it's quite difficult because here in Spain, you're a nurse, I'm a doctor. We're in different roles, different status of social levels, if you will. But I was going to ask about your definition of dementia, because one thing that I think we all struggle, at least the families that I work with, is that it's always a very insidious disease. It's never very clear when it's starting. There are many years that people are treating or not realizing that the mother or the husband is facing these issues, because of this plasticity of the brain that the person is trying to fight with the resources that they've got and be successful in life. So I used to tell my families, don't get messed with a definition of Levy, I don't know how to say the name, of frontal temporal dementia, or it's Alzheimer's. Don't get lost. Just focus on the abilities. What's your opinion on this? I know on the earlier stages.
That's exactly what I do, and I know that when you go to most training, they give you a lot of background on the different kinds of dementia, what they're like, what some of the symptoms and signs are, and I think it's good to know some of those things. If I were diagnosed with dementia, I'd be interested to know what kind and what types of things happen. But the problem is that can lead us to stereotype people, or to put them in a box to say they have to do this because they have Lewy body. They have to do this because they have frontotemporal, and that is also over medicalizing, just like saying dementia is causing this, dementia is causing that. So the nice thing about the well-being approach that I developed is that it can be used with any person, no matter what kind of dementia they have, no matter what so-called stage of dementia they have, because it takes you away from all those medical neurological details, and just says, what's the well-being of this person. And if people know the person well, they can figure that out. They don't need a medical degree. And of course, it demands certain things, like it demands caregivers that know the person well. So that leads to the operational changes, like not moving staff members around so that you have strangers coming in to take care of you. You have to know people well to know how to support their well-being. And that is one of the nice things I've discovered of that definition about dementia, is that when you define dementia as all these complex brain diseases, and the brain is, the most complex thing known to man, then it's hard for anyone to remember that. So the experts are always the specialists, the neurologists and the psychiatrists, the doctors. And so when you have a challenge, if somebody doesn't want to take a shower, what do people do? They're taught that this is complex, call the expert. So they pick up the phone, they call the doctor, and they say, Rodrigo, take a shower. And I went to medical school. No one ever taught me how to give anybody a shower, but they did teach me how to give pills. So if you call me up, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to give you a pill. When you redefine dementia as just a shift in the person's experience, then that turns everything upside down. Now, who's the expert in that definition? The expert is the person who's undergoing the changes and the people closest to that person. So it will be the nurses and the aides and the other people that are spending time and know that person well, family members. And so now, if Rodrigo doesn't want to take a shower, we talk to the people that know him best. And just like you said, we don't worry about what kind of dementia you have. We say, what does he need to find this safe and enjoyable, and to be in control when this is happening? And that's not, if a doctor wants to sit in on that meeting, that's fine, but that's not the doctor's area of expertise. That's really up to the people that know the person and provide the care.
Wow, Dr. Power, I'm really enjoying this conversation with you, but I know you're a very busy man, so I'm going
flies,
just to time flies, but I'm so into the conversation. I hope you are enjoying it too, but I will have two more questions, please. I want you to give us your point of view about hallucinations and delirium, because this is something that when I met your work, I've seen it, I can see it every day. And it's just like you said. So please, if you can share with us your point of view.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the problem with that is the labels we use. The labels we use take us down a different road. When we say hallucinations and delusions, the thing that we're all taught to think about is a disease like schizophrenia, which is what the antipsychotic drugs were developed for back in the 50s and 60s. People with schizophrenia who have hallucinations and delusions. I remind people that what people with schizophrenia have, they don't see things. They have auditory hallucinations. They hear voices, often accusatory voices telling them to do things. People that see things are usually delirious, or they're having a drug reaction. Either they're on a drug like LSD, or they're withdrawing from a drug, and that's when you see things like visual hallucinations, or occasionally with strokes when the brain is damaged. So and same thing with delusions, they're a hallmark of psychosis. And we use the word psychosis too when we talk about dementia. The problem with those is they are psychiatric terms, and when you use those terms, you immediately think antipsychotic, because that's how we treat them in people with psychotic illness. But I believe, and I think some people have also validated, that these symptoms in people with dementia are not the same as they are in people with psychiatric illness. And I think the vast majority of things we call delusions are actually just misinterpretations. And I use a little exercise, a couple of exercises to teach how this is the case. And I'll just give you an example. And I actually wrote this. I was asked to write a chapter for a book about different perspectives on Alzheimer's, and I wrote this, and I thought I came up with this, and I thought, this is just too crazy. They're not going to publish this chapter. But it turned out they did publish it. And
They did it.
the gerontologist who's out in California, who was the editor of the book, she actually teaches it in her courses at the university now. So that was great. So you're probably familiar with it because it's worldwide. We've had a game show in the US called Wheel of Fortune. Do you know that game show?
Yeah.
And you have the phrase up on the board and you have to choose the letters and they fill in the letters and you have to guess the puzzle. And so I say to people, suppose you have, 3 words up there and you've got the middle word is of, OF, and the first one starts with a S and the last one starts with a L and ends with a Y, okay? And if you're relaxed and you're sitting at home and thinking about this, you might, living in New York like I do, you might say, okay, the answer is Statue of Liberty, okay? So I can get it, but when you're on the show, you're nervous. The timer is on. The audience is watching you, and they're saying, "Can you solve the puzzle?" So you give your best guess, and you might say, "Well, is it stacks of laundry or states of lunacy or something like that?" And that sounds funny. It makes us laugh, and yet you are doing the best you can with the information you have. And so I think what happens often with dementia is that we don't have access to information or memory. We see something going on. We have our own life history that we draw on, which can be traumatic sometimes, or other things can have happened to us. Maybe somebody let us down or deceived us. And then when we look around and we are trying to figure out what's going on without all the information, our minds are not gone. We're working very hard to figure out the world, but we just figured it out differently. It's like the person on the game show. We do our best effort to put in place what's going on, but it doesn't happen to be the real thing. And I remind people that if a person on Wheel of Fortune is struggling, if you give them an antipsychotic, it doesn't help them solve the puzzle because that's not really the problem. And so I play a game in my course. It's called "Don't Jump to Conclusions About Those Delusions," and I give people a bunch of delusional statements, and I ask them, pretend you're a person with dementia. If you said this, what is a way that you could very legitimately feel this way without being delusional? So for instance, the first one I give is, they don't like me around here. Sounds very paranoid. But if people's body language, if the way they talk down to people, if the way they treat them is very rough, you could absolutely conclude that. The last one I use, I have about 5 or 6 of them. The last one I used is actually happened to me. And that was, what if somebody says they're poisoning the food around here? Now that sounds very delusional. That actually happened to me. One of the residents I took care of living with dementia stopped eating. She said they're poisoning the food. And people thought that she was delusional. And we looked into it. And it turned out, what we figured out was, she didn't like taking pills. You know that you're a nurse. So what do we do when people don't want their pills? We crush them and we hide them in their food.
We crush them.
Yeah. And so we were giving her, we were saying, try your pudding or try your ice cream.
Whatever.
And your gelato, and they would eat it and they would taste like it was drugged, because it was. And so her conclusion was they were poisoning the food. So what we did was we looked at her medicine. We stopped everything that wasn't essential. We changed some of the formulations, maybe to liquid or something, and we changed the time of day, because there were certain times of day when she was most resistant. And then she started eating again. So she wasn't delusional, but we were actually poisoning the food, and she picked up on it.
For sure.
Yeah. So that's, and as far as hallucinations, there's really the most true hallucinations that occur with Lewy body dementia. That's when people see things. And once again, with schizophrenia, you don't see things. But that's because this is not psychosis. What's happening with Lewy body dementia is the back of the brain, where the visual cortex has been damaged. And when you have damaged nerves, they sometimes just send out impulses. Just like when you've had an amputation, you get that, you feel like you have a foot there, but there's no foot.
So you still have your foot, but it's lost, not the syndrome
yeah. So if you were to call that a hallucination, feeling like you have a foot, that's the same thing. Your visual center is damaged, and so you might see lights, you might see people, you might see animals, you might see things, because your brain's just sending out signals. That is not psychosis, and that does not respond to drugs, antipsychotics. In fact, that's the kind of dementia where antipsychotics are particularly dangerous, because with Lewy body dementia, number one, you're already stiff from Parkinsonism. and the antipsychotics will make you stiffer. And also you tend to have fluctuating levels of consciousness, and they can make you very sleepy, sedated, dangerously low level of consciousness. So we want to avoid those drugs. If there's any pill that helps those kinds of hallucinations, it may be donepezil, the drug Aricept, might increase blood flow to the back of the brain. But a lot of it is just reassurance. And also because people with Lewy body dementia have those Parkinson features, we often give them dopamine. And dopamine is probably the most hallucinogenic drug that we prescribe. So sometimes, and dopamine doesn't work all that well with Lewy body dementia, not like it does with Parkinson's disease. So if somebody's on a lot of the dopamine pills and they're hallucinating, sometimes I'd say, cut that down. Probably not going to hurt them. Take a lower dose, and maybe those things will go away, or give them a different time of day. So, so really, none of them are an indication for antipsychotics. And I was speaking in Italy about a year and a half ago, and the person that came after me was a well-known geropsychiatrist in Italy, and he was one of the original BPSD people, you know. So I thought it'd be interesting to see the contrast before what we said. And I gave my talk, and he got up and he did say during his talk, even though we weren't totally aligned in our view, he said that what we call psychosis in dementia is not the same as psychosis in people with schizophrenia, and it does not respond well to antipsychotics. So he was willing to say that this is not the answer. So I tend to avoid those. Yeah. I tend to avoid those rather than just using those labels, because they make people think the wrong way and act the wrong way, I think.
Yeah, and I have a wrong prescription because we have a wrong diagnosis, no? So we have a wrong prescription. Dr. Power, I don't know how to thank you. It's been a pleasure. What is your future right now? What are you into right now? I know you're going to travel now.
Yeah, well, the well-being approach I talked about, I mentioned my colleague in Arkansas who's had such great support. I'm not a researcher, and it's been hard to get people to do a formal research study. But over the past year, I did do a quality improvement study with one of the homes that I work with in Ontario, Canada. And we went to one living area, one neighborhood that was all dementia, 32 people with dementia living there. And I taught them the approach, and what they did as part of the study, the study was for a year. And they, every month, they would pick one person who they were concerned about, and they would use this well-being approach for them. And we would have monthly calls. We would do some coaching calls. And also, if somebody else came along they wanted to try it with beyond the one person, they would add them too. So over the course of the year, they used the approach with 20 people. Now, one of the 20 people had a psychiatric illness. And so they were going to stay on their antipsychotic. Even though they were better, they weren't going to stop the drug because they also had psychosis. The other 19 just had dementia, but were on pills. And at the end of the study, all of those 19 people were stopped of their antipsychotic medication, every single one. And since then, one went to the hospital and got restarted. Somebody else, family member, wanted restarted. So 2 people got restarted in the last 6 months, but there's still 17 out of 19 have done well without the pills. And once again, you don't see studies that get those levels of success. They had a very motivated team. They had me doing a lot of coaching. I'm now looking for funding for a larger study to try to spread this to more care environments, to really put something we can actually publish as a prospective study in a journal. I'm traveling less. I'm getting older now, but I am taking a big trip next month. I'll be speaking in California, and then from California, I'll be speaking in New Zealand and Australia with my colleague Jessica Lou Kim from Canada, who does a lot of work with me. And so we're looking forward to talking about that, and also talking about my next book, which I am co-writing with Professor Jennifer Carson, a good friend of mine from Nevada, and Pat Sprigg, another friend who operated a long-term care community in North Carolina for 30 years. And this book is about how to unlock and desegregate people with dementia. So how do we create places in residential care where everybody lives together and the doors aren't locked? And I've been talking about that since my first book. And so we're writing a book about why we think it's important. We'll have all the arguments in there. And then we have what we call 5 positive pathways to help organizations if they want to create an inclusive environment. and stories of people who have done it. And Pat is one of the people. The years when she was the CEO in North Carolina, they never had many acres of lawns and woods and a pond and roads, and no gates, no fences, no separation, no alarms, and they've done it successfully. And so we tell the stories and talk about how we think this is a human right of people with dementia to not be locked up and separated from the rest of the world. And so that will be an interesting book when it comes out. Probably
yeah,
about a
for
year.
sure. It sounds
probably about
great.
a year from now we'll have it. So that's
okay.
We'll talk about that too.
We will wait your book with a lot of curiosity, and don't forget to include the Maria Montessori approach, because the prepared environment is quite important for her. No, it's one of the keys of the pedagogy. And Doctor, just thank you for existing, because I think people like you pushing to take care of each other on a human way I think is so necessary. So thank you for your work. Thank you for all these years.
My pleasure. Thanks for the podcast. I think it's very important for people to tune in and listen to you.
Yeah, and thank you for helping me spreading this good news, and hopefully this will reach a lot of people. So I set you free, and I really thank you.
Anytime. Great speaking with you.
Pues ahí habéis tenido la entrevista completa con el doctor Alan Power. Espero que la hayáis disfrutado. Para aquellos que lo hayáis escuchado con traducción en español, pues siento mucho que haya sido una traducción así como de andar por casa. Espero que se haya entendido bien la entrevista. Y si queréis apoyarnos, pues no te olvides de compartir este podcast con aquellas personas que pienses que les puede interesar. Y sobre todo, que parece que el algoritmo premia mucho eso, déjame algún comentario. Así sé pues, si te ha gustado, si no, si quieres que contrate un traductor simultáneo para mejorar esta traducción. Y nada, muchísimas gracias. Nos vemos en el próximo episodio, que seguro que también os va a encantar. ¡Hasta pronto!
Y aquí termina Perdonen que no me acuerde, un programa de Montessori Senior. Gracias por dedicarnos estos minutos. Os esperamos en www.montessorisenior.es. Hasta la próxima.